Good afternoon. My name is Michael Sharon. I'm a senior advisor at the Bank of England and deeply involved in the bank's work on international green and climate finance and policy. Also, I was the co-chairman of the Green Finance and Sustainable Finance Study Group within the G20, where my co-chairman, Dr. Majan, who, by the way, will be on this panel today, and I think really helped break some of the early thought around climate and climate solutions just on the heels of the Paris agreements. Now, what I'd like to do today is take the group of people that we've collected, and these are not just people that know about carbon credits, and climate. These are a collection of people who have been deeply involved, not just on the thought side of things, but they're actually doers. They're thought leaders, and they've done extraordinary things in the marketplace. But before I make the introduction to my panel, I'd like to just set the scene a little bit. We're in the middle of COP right now. There's an extraordinary opportunity to make big things happen quickly. And as you all know, we have no choice. We really do have to make things happen quickly. And so as part of that, we wanted to have a discussion around the voluntary carbon markets. So as part of climate change, the most important thing to do simply is reduce carbon, but our entire global economy is based on it. So there needs to be tools or a toolkit to help work through that reduction. So every company in the world has a carbon footprint, and they need to transition their business model, how they make things, how they do things, from a high, low, medium carbon to eventually to a net zero carbon. Now, carbon credits are generated from either nature or from areas of technology around wind farms and things of that sort. And those carbon credits can act as a really important tool for a company trying to transition their business model from a higher carbon to a lower carbon place. And so the problem is, well, there's plenty of problems, and we're going to discuss those in today's panel. But what we really want to do is understand not just what those problems and challenges are, but how we can basically start meeting them and solving them. Now, again, on a framework setting, as I said, right now the world works off of voluntary carbon markets. And it means there are no set rules, there's no set organization, there's certainly guidelines provided by Article 6. But we're going to start unpicking some of those items and basically talk through the details. Now, to do this, I'd like to introduce my panel. So first person is, of course, without Dr. Majan. Dr. Majan, there hasn't been a policy that he hasn't been involved in climate over the last 10 years. His work on the G20 with myself, his work at the PBOC, with the Green Finance Committees, within the IMF. He is truly not only a thought leader, as I've said before, but he's also been involved in actually making policy change. So he'll be here, and again, he is, as always, in travel, so we'll get him on the move. Dr. Bobow, I would say not just a doer, but a visionary, because we've got two mega trends going out right now. One is sustainability. We need to have a sustainable planet, but technology is the other mega trend, and the two combined will actually allow us to provide solutions. In an analog world, it may not be possible to be able to change things quickly. So being able to use technology from everything from blockchain to store information to AI to things of that sort are going to be utterly critical in achieving our goals. Dr. Christine Chow, she is the group head of stewardship for HSBC, Global Asset Management. Dr. Chow has been involved, again, like everyone else, deeply in a variety of areas. In the private sector, she's contributed to policymaking, an incredibly articulate person and deeply knowledgeable in the carbon space. And last but certainly not least is Dr. Lorenzo Berlusconi. Again, has worked both public-private. He's done some incredible work at the Rockefeller Center, but also is currently head of climate environmental solutions at Lombard Odier. Again, an organization committed to sustainability and using their place in the financial service industry to achieve on that. Now, with that said, setting the scene, great panel. I think we need to get right in and start the discussion. So I'd like to start things first off with Christine. Christine, would you like to talk to us about the first key elements you see on this topic?
Thanks, Michael, for inviting me to speak at this panel. I'm honored to be here. Maybe I can start off with just before the pandemic. Actually, our last discussion on carbon markets take me back to at the time at Washington, D.C., because I was invited to speak at a human rights event at the IFC. And what we discussed was that the social and human impact of climate change is something that we really need to focus on above and beyond markets that we need to create. And at the time, we talked about the use of distributed ledger technology, DLT, or commonly known as blockchain, in order to have improve the transparency and traceability of high quality carbon offsets. And of course, since then, the World Bank has launched its own initiative on meta registry of carbon credits, as well as there are some markets meta registry around the place as well. So I think that we are in a very good place to start thinking about how to unify what you've mentioned earlier, the disjointed regional, national and subnational carbon markets that are around the place. So just to set the scene in terms of the variability of carbon prices, I think it can vary from about $3 to $50 per ton. And the coverage at the moment is very, very limited to about 16% of all carbon emissions, according to the World Bank. So we have that means that despite the challenges, we're in a very good place to make improvements. So I'll pass on to the next speaker.
Okay, Christine, thank you very much. And before we move to the next speaker, what I'd like to say is you pointed out three really, really important things. I think the most important is this transition has to be a just transition. And carbon credits, a lot of them are going to come from emerging markets. So making sure that we get the system working is not important just to the wealthy and developing world who desperately also need to have carbon reduced, but it's absolutely critical to the emerging markets and has to be a just transition. I thought two other things that were absolutely critical as well. One is transparency. And transparency gives you an opportunity to show that something's validated, that it's proper, and that it's working. So I think those types of issues can't be lost in this. Now, I'd like to move over to Lorenzo. And again, your work both with the Rockefeller Foundation, with Lombard Odier in the private sector, public sector, you've got a unique insight into some of the issues around the voluntary carbon markets. Lorenzo, let me hand it over to you for your opening thoughts.
Well, thank you so much. And let me just say it's an enormous pleasure to be part of such a great panel and talking about such an important issue. You know, so maybe I just will start with, Michael, back to your point, kind of highlighting, I think, the importance of the voluntary carbon market as we think about the global climate solution. When you think about the fact that 80% of all emissions are not covered by any kind of regulated regime. So if you look at that, you know, the drive now towards net zero, which is, as all of you know, picking up pace, and 2/3 of the global GDP now covered by net zero targets. This really kind of speaks to the importance, I think, of getting this bit of the equation right when it comes to the voluntary carbon market. And I think that I see the market as at an inflection point, not just because of this demand, but also because, we now do have, as you mentioned, 2 decades worth of experience thinking about kind of what quality looks like when it comes to a carbon credit. And these are the kinds of foundations that we can build on. And at the same time, there's new technologies coming online, which are, allowing us to do better sourcing, better verification, tracing, as we've mentioned, and of course, kind of on the commercialization of these credits, which I think really will open up this market to being kind of a more deep and robust market. But that said, maybe just I think on some of the challenges, and some of this does pick up on what's been said by Christine. One thing which I think, at the global level, what we need here is we need to bring integrity and we need to bring in scale. That's the only way that this market is actually going to make a dent. And on the integrity side, there's been a lot of talk on the demand side. We need to make sure that the SBTI and the TSVCM and others have been trying to put on certain guardrails as to how it is that corporations should use offsets or carbon credits. And that's obviously very important that we see this as additional to their own decarbonization, which of course has to be kind of the first priority. And of course, then on the supply side, making sure that the credits that are brought to market, and frankly, that the market then moves towards really quality, and we don't find ourselves kind of in a situation whereby the quality of these credits are questioned, in which case I think we could really be held back. But I think a really important point that Christine mentioned is this question around the accounting, right? Making sure that we have the connectivity, and that's often forgotten in these conversations. Making sure that, questions around accounting for, the Article 6 of the Paris Agreement, that accounting framework between the voluntary market and, the NDCs that governments are making, that accounting is tight. I think another important point that I think is important to mention, and Michael, this gets to your point around the just transition and to the question of scale, which is that if we're going to bring scale to this market, needless to say, nature is going to be at the heart of the carbon credits that are produced. And we know that 90% of the foreseeable supply is going to come from emerging markets. And of that, 65 to 85% of it is going to be nature-based. And so there's an enormously important question here to also think about how is it that we can strengthen the infrastructure, particularly in developing countries, for the production of these high-quality carbon credits. And not only that, it's incredibly important that, to the just transition story, that we make sure that indigenous and local communities benefit in this market, and we find ways in which we can actually, engage them and also make sure that they benefit from this going forward. So I'll stop there.
Lorenzo, thank you. That's absolutely brilliant. And a couple of things you brought into this as around scale and integrity is absolutely important, because if we don't do this at scale, and this is something Majun and I talked about. And by the way, for those of you watching us and listening to us, of course, you've spent the last 2 years understanding the technical challenges of a global pandemic. And I believe Dr. Majun has joined us. I see his name up there on my screen. And if he is here, it'd be great if he could turn on his camera. Because Majun, are you there with us? If you are, what I'd like to do is very briefly do a quick introduction to you again, because obviously the amount of work that you've done over the years has just been extraordinary. And would love to have you talk about the policy developments, whether it be through the G20, the IMF, around the importance of carbon markets. Though I think we may have lost Majun again, so if we do pick him up, we're going to bring you right back to him. But in the meantime, I'm going to move over to Dr. Bobao. Now, he's distinguished himself in so many different ways in the markets. I mean, the Asian Green Fund, which he founded and manages, is an exemplary tool of how you put real money to work changing things. And as I said, this is a group of not just thought leaders, but doers. And he's also the founder of CTX, Cyberdyne Tech Exchange, which will be able to take carbon credits, digitize them, and make them available at scale. And this is to your point, Lorenzo. And what I'd like really is just to start things off. Bo, could you talk to us a little bit about how you've evolved and start thinking about the voluntary carbon market and how you're responding to it?
Yeah, Michael, thank you very much. And it's a great pleasure to be with such a distinguished group of panelists. It's just fantastic. My journey really starts from the challenges that we faced when we were working on the Asia Green Fund, when we made a whole bunch of impact investing in China in particular, and looking at how the carbon market and then how the China, while developing the carbon market, can facilitate the assistance to the green infrastructure development. As we know, when China and then globally trying to reach the net zero target, a lot of capital will be needed. And I think both Christian and Lorenzo made some fantastic point, but I just pick on the integrity and the scale. Maybe just add one more feature to that is the global collaboration and the global joint efforts to make it work in order to reach the scale that is needed. During the Kyoto Protocol, we had the CDM mechanism that makes things work, and it's fantastic that so many countries signed up to the Paris Agreement. But unfortunately, the absence of the passing of Article 6 of Paris Agreement made it quite challenging to have all the cross-border and international trades for the voluntary carbon market to facilitate all these global collaboration on the infrastructure. So that's why, starting from 2.5 years ago, that we founded CTX in order to solve the problem. To Christian's point, and we think not only that you need to be able to combine this national and international policy work and regulatory work with the technology advancement on the carbon registry, but we think this whole technology and the joint efforts should be carried out through the whole processes. So that's why we established such a system from the verification certification, trying to work with the best firms such as DNV and Bureau Veritas, and along that way, and with the national carbon registry in China or international carbon registry such as World Bank's, and then we take that carbon voluntary emission reduction as the assets, and then to digitalize them with the blockchain technology, just so that we can keep track of the whole processes of verification, certification, registry, and now move on to the trading regime. Because we are doing this in a format of what we call digital depository receipt, which is a very similar version of American depository receipt as we went for listing of the stocks. And then we were able to solve these NDC issues while everybody's waiting for Article 6 to be passed. And that's how we actually begin to be able to establish the system to trade what we call carbon neutrality token. And it's really efforts to combine the national and international efforts with the blockchain technology to make it a viable pathway to combine the financial innovation, technology innovation, and policy innovation, and then to make it work jointly to bring scale, to bring international capital to this carbon voluntary markets. So that's really the key efforts that we're focusing on, and then it's just fantastic to be able to join the panel again and then to hear all the perspectives.
Bo, that's absolutely intriguing, and it's really powerful because, as we all know, climate change is really a tragedy of the horizon. The horizons, as Mark Carney said, they're the commons, as we would say in philosophics. So we really need to basically have a global solution that actually ties countries together on this. And I would argue the one thing after climate and solving sustainability that's absolutely going to get us there is around technology. Now, I believe, Christine, you had something you wanted to contribute on the DLT, specifically on the technology around this.
Thank you. It's more of a question, actually, because when it comes to using blockchain or DLT, I think a common question asked by clients, and my clients, I represent the asset management side, so it's clients of HSBC Asset Management, which would be a lot of different asset owners, both institutional and also retail, is what about the energy that is used to run that blockchain? Are we talking about proof of work or proof of stake? Because the energy requirement and the time would be very different. And then also, how can you ensure that the energy sources that is used to maintain this through chain work is clean? So I think there would be one of the questions that I would get asked if we kind of think of this as a solution. Thank you.
No, that's a great question, and Bo, I'm going to let you tackle that one in a moment, but because it's been a global question around all the different types of, and again, people often get blockchain, the enterprise function of just simply communication, often confused with currencies and things of that sort. And again, for those that are not technically savvy, we're talking about blockchain is simply a way of putting information safely, securely, and encrypted into a digital format to move it through. And it's certainly been a challenge. And I know that like Ethereum blockchain is looking to actively move to a highly less decarbonizing the methodology. But I guess I'm going to hand this over to Bo to talk a little bit about how he sees this and the path of travel that the blockchain industry and being able to net off the advantages as well as the challenges to distributed ledger technology. Bo.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Christine. That is a wonderful question. Indeed, while we're benefiting from the distributed ledger technology, the energy consumption and hence the carbon footprint is a matter that we should care greatly about. Not all digital assets are created equal, and then particularly at this current moment, Bitcoins and Ether are still utilizing the proof of work, and hence a tremendous amount of energy consumption are utilized to mine them. Of course, as Ether gradually move to the proof of stake, we anticipate that carbon footprint and energy consumption will improve as we progress. As a matter of fact, at CTX, we published a white paper just in terms of the methodology to calculate the carbon footprint of 1 Bitcoin and 1 Ether, depending on the energy sources, and then the default number that we utilize for 1 Bitcoin is 170 a ton of carbon footprint, and it's about 3.3 ton of carbon for 1 Ether. Of course, depending on the energy source, just as Christine said, if it's a renewable power, the number will be substantially changed, and hence, the whole conversation about verification and certification still also applies here as well. The way that we solve this problem is actually twofold. The first one is to really bring attention to the investors about their portfolio, just so that they have the right insight on their carbon footprint. CTX is the first exchange to require not only carbon disclosure by the issuer, but also the carbon disclosure by the investors as well. Every asset bring onto the platform will be required to have a third party such as Bureau Veritas or DNB to verify and certify the carbon footprint of that assets. For example, in these circumstances, Bitcoins traded on our platform will have each 170 ton of carbon footprint. So bring that awareness and insight is a critical first step. And then at the same time, CTX also allowed a real carbon voluntary emission reduction to be issued on the platform as a carbon neutrality token. And each carbon neutrality token represents a real digital deposit receipt of 1 ton of carbon emission reduction that is certified and verified in the real world to safeguard integrity. And hence the investor is able to buy the carbon token to offset and to neutralize some of their carbon footprint of some other assets. And at the same time, we actually greatly utilize the Ethereum technology and then to improve the efficiency as well. So this is a wonderful question, and then real problem that needs to resolve, and then we are putting a system to address this problem and then to build such a digital green exchange. Thank you.
So that was really helpful. And I know that's a question that crops up, not just even for blockchain technology, because we're trying to transition a global real economy. And it's very difficult to get from a brown industry to turn it to a perfectly green one, but you need to do all those different pieces. And again, how the energy, where it comes from, is really critical. Now, I've got some great news because I can see on my screen Dr. Ma Jun, and I was joking. I go, I bet you Ma Jun is going to be in a car and we're going to catch him going someplace because he's almost omnipresent. If we could clone him and put him in 10 places at the same time, he'd need to be in 20 places. So in some ways, we're very lucky that we've only got one of him, and we've got the one, Dr. Ma Jun, with us. Ma Jun, great to see you. We've had a really great discussion so far, but the one area that we really haven't talked about, which is your area of expertise. Look, there is not a global policy, nothing that you haven't been a part of in the last 10 years, whether it be on taxonomies, whether it be on carbon credits, whether it be on disclosure, green finance. You have been basically omnipresent in the global discussion. And the discussion today is really about voluntary carbon credits. We may at some point move into compulsory, but the importance of having a carbon credit market, and want to know if you could share with people what you've been seeing in the global policy side, what your views are on carbon credit markets, the importance, and anything else that you'd like to contribute on this. But anyway, lovely to see you, and we're going to hand over the screen to you, Ma Jun.
Thank you so much, Michael. You hear me okay?
Loud and clear.
Great. Now, maybe just a quick update on what's going on at the G20 level, which, Michael, so well. We both co-chaired the G20 Green Finance Study Group from 2016 to 2018. But this year, the study group is co-chaired by myself representing China and Larry from the US Treasury. And we have upgraded this study group to a working group. So this year, it's been a bigger job because we need to form the global consensus on roadmap. As you probably know, that the roadmap was published yesterday after being endorsed by the G20 leaders. Now, from the roadmap, let me just highlight a couple of things. I think the most important message is that we need to move towards comparability, interoperability, and consistency of global sustainable finance standards, including taxonomies and disclosure requirements. So there are a lot of reference on how taxonomies should gradually converge and how an internationally consistent set of reporting standards should be developed by ISSB. So I won't get into too much detail of that, but I think it's important I ask you actually read the roadmap, which will guide the G20 and many IOs work in the coming few years. But back to your question on voluntary carbon markets, most of you know that Mark Carney kicked off this idea of a task force on voluntary carbon markets, and recently this task force has formed a new governance body, which will have a new name. I think they have not announced a new name yet. I am on the board of this new governance body, and going forward, this governance body will convene, more experts to develop a set of high integrity principles for voluntary carbon markets. And my colleagues in Asia, they are contributing to different working groups already. And we're hopeful that the application of the carbon credit into carbon markets around the world, I'm hopeful that in different time zones, there will be one or two voluntary carbon markets. I know Singapore is already developing one, and I think Hong Kong is thinking about doing something like that. That serves the sort of the Asian time zone, but we certainly need a few more. They're covering, the UK time zone, covering the US, Latin American time zone. And globally, I'm hoping that all these voluntary carbon markets should be using similar standards, if they are not identical, with the same framework at least, developed by the task force of the voluntary carbon markets. And I'm also hopeful that the carbon credits developed by major industries that can reduce carbon or absorb carbon or remove carbon, for example, in forestry, in renewable energy, and in carbon capture technology application areas can be included. So that's probably what I want to share in my first go. Okay. Back to you, Michael.
Great, Majan. Thank you so much. And again, you've done a great job covering with, even though you missed a little bit at the beginning, you cut all the major topics we had discussed as you would expect. And again, I'd like to bring up a reoccurring theme, and that's the need for some levels of harmonization and high integrity, because ultimately this is such a global problem that we need to be able to communicate with each other, to be able to trade across jurisdictions, to trade across time zones is really, really important. Now, I'd like either Christine or Lorenzo, because one of the challenges, and if you could kind of articulate it, because I'm already setting up Bo for an answer, but one of the challenges is around the NDCs. If you've got in a particular country a carbon, they want to demonstrate that that's being attributed to the country, but that country may not need it. Actually, in some ways, a lot of the developing markets who have lots of trees and the potential for a lot of markets want credits for that, but those credits could be applied in other places better. So could you kind of help unpick that challenge? And then I think it'd be interesting to go back over to Bo on how he, in a little more detail to unpack how they've basically overcome that challenge. I think I'll start with Christine, and then we'll go to Lorenzo on that. Christine, please.
Thank you very much. I actually suggested Lorenzo to go first.
Okay. Well, look, why don't we hand over to Lorenzo? Yeah, I should be reading my text box. So Lorenzo, I'm going to hand over to you and see if you could kind of address that one, and then we'll go over to Bo.
No, for sure. I mean, look, I think you're exactly right in highlighting that as a problem, and maybe just to get us all on the same page. The issue that we have here is that as these NDCs and countries who are, party to the Paris Agreement, if within your country, let's say you are Brazil, you sell a voluntary carbon credit to, say, a Swiss company, the question is, who's going to claim that? Is it going to be then Brazil, or is it going to be then Switzerland? And as a Swiss company, you would think, well, if this is part of, one of a company headquartered in Switzerland, there's the danger here that you would have the double counting. So that same carbon credit would then count towards Brazil's NDC as well as Switzerland's NDC. And this is obviously a big issue. And I think it's very important here in making sense of this to divide up two issues. There's anyone who's buying this in a compliance market versus a voluntary market. And when we're talking about the voluntary market, you're really talking about, as the name suggests, companies and others that are doing this on a voluntary basis. And companies, as we know, are not party to the Paris Agreement. So I think that the kinds of solutions that we're talking about here and that Bo is spearheading really help resolve a really important issue here, which is that as a corporate, you should have no issue in being able to buy the credit from Brazil, count it towards your own, net zero or carbon neutrality claims, but that from an accounting perspective, from an NDC perspective, that should remain with Brazil and not go, say, to Switzerland in the case that I highlighted. Of course, in the compliance market, that looks very different, in which case you do need as quote unquote corresponding adjustments, whether that be in CORSIA for the airlines, or indeed, as we think about Article 6 coming into play with ITMOs. But I think that this is a really important issue where we do need, and I think overlooked. I mean, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, we speak a lot about demand integrity, we speak a lot about supply integrity, but this accounting issue is fundamental, because if we don't get this right, we don't know what we're shooting for globally when it actually comes to net zero. And the only net zero that matters here is global net zero. It doesn't matter, frankly, whether we're talking about an individual company or a country. It's the global accounting that we need to have straight, and that's why this is such an incredibly important issue, and we need solutions to it.
No, that was incredibly articulate, Lorenzo. Thank you very much on that. And again, we can't have literally carbon credits trapped in a country, because ultimately there's multiple things we need to achieve with those. Now, Bo, you touched on it a little bit, but you've put together, from what I understand, a way of being able to, I think you started with, you picked a small country to do a prototype on, China. Nothing like, everything China does is big. So, instead of starting with like Liechtenstein or with Luxembourg, you decided to go with China. And obviously, but it's important because China, the United States, EU, all matter, India, all these countries are profound. So it's quite impressive that you started. But from what I understand, that you're able to actually take high quality carbon credits where China can still get the benefit of them, but still be able to transfer them onto the exchange to either a corporate or, and what I also like to know is when you talk us through that, that's great. But I'm also kind of curious to know, if I'm the CFO of a corporation and I need offsets for my company, will I at some point even be able to do those orders maybe on my smartphone as opposed to even, but that's getting a little bit down the road. Can you first talk us through how you've overcome this accounting issue? That's the big issue.
Thank you, Michael. And Lorenzo was exactly articulating the issue. It's a little bit ironic is that Paris Agreement with NDC is a great achievement, but at the same time, it inadvertently put a carbon voluntary emission credit with the nationality. They should not have, because this is really a global issue. It needs a global effort to tackle it, but NDC made it as a national ownership. So the way that we think that we actually created the system with initial testing on the China side is to utilize carbon registry and blockchain technology. So that's actually very powerful. I'll start from the first batch, how it worked. It really is a central SOE developed a wind project in China's Winter Olympics city in China that is going to go up for Winter Olympics soon. And then going through the whole certification process to become China's voluntary emission reduction. Remember, we're talking about voluntary emission reduction. We're not talking about allowance market. So such a voluntary emission reduction is recorded on China's National Voluntary Emission Reduction Registry. And then here is the registry becomes extremely important. It is a core place to avoid a double counting in the whole system. China has developed such infrastructure, but for those countries, actually there are a fair amount of countries do not have the National Voluntary Emission Reduction Registry yet. And I think the World Bank's efforts and some other private sector solution also plays an important role. And then when you have this voluntary emission reduction registered in China's carbon registry, we worked with the local voluntary emission state-owned exchange so that such a voluntary emission reduction is frozen in China's carbon registry. By freezing means that this carbon voluntary emission reduction was a real one, was registered in China's system, but is not utilized for other commercial trading or other voluntary net zero activity in China anymore. So this is the critical point number one. Point number two is blockchain technology, and then in the format of similar to American depository receipt or what we call a digital depository receipt, in combination, put these assets, which is essentially voluntary emission reduction, stays in China's registry, and then put that as underlying assets and in depository, and then issue a digital receipt on CTX, which we are a licensed platform in Singapore, regulated by Monetary Authority of Singapore. And then Singapore government is just fantastic in terms of being proactive, progressive on the digital space. So we issued this digital token, what we call a carbon neutrality token, and every one token is corresponding to 1 ton of a carbon emission, voluntary emission reduction credit from China that was certified by qualified entity, that was registered and frozen on China's carbon registry. Now, we sold this to the international community. And then when the international community, whichever corporate, for example, a Swiss company, bought this token and then used that to do a voluntary net zero effort for their carbon footprint of their office building, for example, that creates, from the global perspective, it really is offsetting globally neutralization efforts for their voluntary carbon footprint. So this way that we can help globally to achieve the net zero efforts on a voluntary basis, but at the same time do not create an issue for the NDC as we speak for today. So we rolled out these efforts over the past 2 months, and it has been quite interesting to see various people come to us to say, hey, this is very interesting. And then we wanted to do it, and then historically we did not have ways to do it. Now you build the whole system with the national registry, and then with the digital technology blockchain to keep track of everything, and then to safeguard the integrity. We're hoping this technology can bring scale to solve the problem Lorenzo articulated so well.
Yeah, no, Bo, that's brilliant. And it brings up a couple key issues. One is when Christine was talking about, the importance of a just transition and to make sure that emerging markets get covered. This unlocks their opportunity to both get the credit for it, but also be able to help others with it, which is quite impressive. The integrity issue around blockchain, as Dr. Ma pointed out, is absolutely critical as well, and it helps capture that. Now, Lorenzo, I think you've got something to comment on this on as well.
Yeah, no, it was really just on those points. So I think that, I think it's worth saying one thing, which is that there's only, a lot of these mostly tropical countries, but emerging market countries, I mean, a lot of the supply is going to be in the global south. And the trick here is that the kind of green growth future of these countries has to be one which respects nature, where they invest in nature, and where, frankly, you find a way in which you can make it, a standing tree or a standing forest worth more than a dead one. And really, the carbon markets is unlocking this in a way that is extraordinarily important. So I just think that point I wanted to emphasize, and the importance of this, getting that integrity and this accounting element really right, is that if we have that, you really can imagine, billions, if not hundreds of millions, but certainly billions, maybe hundreds of billions, if some estimates are correct.
Trillions. In climate, we don't deal in millions and billions. To get things done, we need to start talking trillions, Lorenzo. I don't want to hear anything else.
But there we go. So trillions. And I think an important element to this as well on the blockchain question is, on the verification and the certification side as well. So, one thing is this accounting at the global level, but we also need to bring this down to the kind of on the ground. And there's an enormous, I think, need here also to think about technology in the production of carbon credits, really to make this more transparent and also to reduce the costs. Because I think an enormous kind of barrier here, and back to the question of the just transition, is it's very expensive. Verification costs are very expensive. And often, the best stewards of nature are often local communities and indigenous groups and others. And, there's a need here that I think we should not forget. On one hand, finding ways in which they can participate in this market. And, I think that the supply side is incredibly important for us to focus on as well. And I think that on that front, these kinds of technologies, maybe linked also with satellite technologies and others, have a potential here to really disrupt the market, reduce the costs, and hopefully really bringing both scale and integrity at a cost-effective level to the market.
Lorenzo, those are really important comments, because technology, and as I said before, it's really sustainability and technology. If you're looking at the two mega trends that we need to harness to solve the problem, these are it. We need to find sustainable business models, a low carbon, non-carbon economic model, which is driven by sustainability. But I think the only way we're really going to do that is being able to harness technology on it. I think your points around verification, whether using low altitude satellites, spatial things, are absolutely key. And I'm going to diverge just for one moment before I go to Christine, because I know she's got something she wants to chime in on. But some people say, well, what will change if at some point we have a situation where we have to go to a compulsory carbon market, which would take the form, the EU is looking at a cap and trade, but also we might just go to a flat out, as the IMF had recommended, a carbon tax. And at least from my view, that makes the carbon credits just as important, or more so. So if you were going to have a compulsory market, let's say across the G20, starting at $20 or $25 per ton, and then moving up to 120 or 130, which are about the prices that most of the OECD, the Bank of England, a variety of other places think we need to be approximately. But even with that, those emerging markets and those providers of credit still need to provide those credits, because no corporation can go from a brown carbon-based corporation overnight. And the shock absorbers are still going to be essentially those carbon credits. And so even when you're being taxed on them, as long as those carbon credits are $1 or more or less than the actual tax, there's going to be an absolute role for that. So the infrastructure and the technology we've been talking about, the solutions, I think they apply irrespective of a voluntary market, or if we at some point in the future move to a compulsory market. Now, I've taken us a little off track here, Christine, but I thought it was important for people to recognize carbon credits are absolutely essential in the technology driving them and the harmonization across jurisdictions, irrespective of what type of regime or paradigm we're in. So I'm going to hand over to you now on your next point.
Not at all diverted. In fact, I was actually participating in the judging of the G20 tech sprint that has taken place this year, led by Bank of Italy. And a lot of that technology focus is on linking corporate disclosure to technology that can provide us with the information that is also linked to carbon credits as well. So the point I want to make is with regard to the supply in emerging markets and what they're doing. So if you look at Indonesia earlier this year have piloted and they launched a carbon market for coal-fired power plants. It's very, very difficult for a big country with so many people's lives and livelihoods at stake to just make that jump. But they have taken their first step. And in order to be able to help them progress, accelerating a global framework for all the good qualities that we've talked about today is essential. And also, I think the narrative around climate change is important. It's now enhanced to a level where we think we can't just look at issue by issue. We need to look at nature as a holistic system. And this is where we might find a lot of the solutions, such as what Lorenzo has said earlier at the very beginning. We're now going back to the very beginning. Is that about 65% of those credits is nature-based? We will have to find them. We will have to find a way to get them out and use and create a system in order to be able to trade them efficiently so that we can find new solutions to our problems.
That's spot on. And one of the things we talk about quite a bit in economics, and we've talked about G20 and across the Bank of England, is obviously from an economic point of view, carbon is a free riding negative externality. But the problem is the carbon credits, the sink, doesn't have a price on it either. It's a free riding positive externality, and in getting a price on it and being able to unlock that across jurisdictions and be able to get that accounting right and getting the fast movement. And again, I think Lorenzo pointed out price. And Bo, look at technology is so much cheaper and easier to scale than our analog systems. And I think, and as Majun pointed out, I think either they're, having a digital carbon exchange in every financial center, or by the way, in your home, being able to get that technology scalable across that is going to be absolutely key. Now, we're running close on time. So what I'd love to do is give everybody an opportunity for just a really quick summing up of what you think are the key takeaways from your point of view for people watching this. I mean, we've made it very clear, we need to be able to use these carbon credits as a shock absorber, irrespective of voluntary compulsory system. There's some real big issues on it, but there's really solutions as well. As I pointed out in the beginning, you guys aren't just thought leaders, but you're doers. So I'm going to start with Lorenzo, then I'm going to go to Christine, and then we'll finish up with Bo. And I'll say thank you, but let's go to Lorenzo for your final. What are the takeaways? What do people need to think about when they leave this webinar? What do you think?
Well, I think what I take away from this and what's exciting is to say, look, this world of the carbon markets is complicated in that it brings together policy questions, international negotiations, and obviously, supply side working with local communities, and obviously the private sector. And what I think is exciting coming out of this is that you're seeing technology and you're seeing the private sector taking this kind of holistic view, moving towards this question of integrity, questions of accounting that are being taken seriously. And I think that makes me very hopeful for really the development of a market, as I mentioned before, that needs to have that integrity and scale to really be successful.
Fantastic. Christine.
I'm going to go back to also the transparency and traceability. Technology is here. We have Bobai has kindly answered that question that's commonly asked around energy usage and how it might work in DLT. So we have the technology available. We have the commitment available. I know financial services is being put under a lot of pressure, especially at COP26, to find solution, because I think the narrative around we're 1 minute to midnight. Yes, but how are we going to do that, right? 1 minute to midnight. How are we going to do it? And we've seen that, for example, our group CEO, Noah Quinn, he's leading the Financial Services Task Force on Sustainability. Our CEO of the Asset Management, Nicola Munro, he's also at COP26. Leaders are there. They're working out how we're going to finance these transitions. And so I'm very hopeful that with a combination of proven technology as well as the commitment and policymakers providing the framework, we're going to get there.
Fantastic. Bo, your solutions. Give us your summing.
Yeah, it's a very inspirational conversation. I greatly appreciate that. Look, over the past many years that we see how WTI and Brent crude, essentially standardized the benchmark of crude oil in that old age. And I'm just so excited and then so comforted to see that all the efforts that we are all trying to utilize technology on the certification and verification side, trying to work with the national and international carbon registry, and then trying to use the blockchain technology to solve the integrity and the scale problem. I believe with all these efforts that we can jointly, globally drive a solution, then hopefully over the next 10 to 15 years that we can see, the WTI and the Brent standardized version type of standardized carbon credits and in a digital format that will be able to make the whole carbon market much easier and then much more accountable, and then with all the transparency, and then being able to leveraging global financial resources to drive the scale of the market, and then to really drive all those efforts to reduce the carbon emissions. So I'm very grateful to be here.
Oh, thank you so much. And I guess I'll sum up a little bit for Dr. Ma. I mean, the two of us probably spoke every day for about 4 years, so in some ways very much in tune. And he continues to work on some of the most important policy areas. As Christine pointed out, it's not just business. It's a combination of governments, it's local and global international organizations. It's really about getting the alignment, not only of where we want to land, but how do we get there? How do we do it? Making sure the train tracks are the same gauge. So when we go from one place to the other, it all works. And look, there's nothing, seriously, nothing more important than us being able to decarbonize the global economy. And carbon credits, voluntary or compulsory, are absolutely the key linchpin in that, in terms of being able to provide that shock absorber. I know that some of the countries are doing, holding corporations to account. They can't buy 100% of their emissions in carbon credits. Some of them are putting limits on it of 5 and 10%. And I think that's the type of balance. We're not looking for people not to use the carbon credits to just kind of put a fig leaf. We're trying to use them to give opportunity of breathing space, to be able to get from a high carbon business model to a non-carbon one. And that's what I think allows us that opportunity. And technology, accountability is really the way forward. All of you have done a really articulate, masterful job, I think, of bringing the key challenges and some of the really good opportunities for solutions to forefront. So again, I'd like to thank my distinguished panel. Christine Chow, you're amazing. You've done a great job. I think the group is just amazing. Lorenzo, Lombard Odier is really, like HSBC, the two organizations that are really taking sustainability and putting it front and center of their organizations. Bao, without a doubt, not only a thought leader, but a thought doer. You're making things happen. And again, Dr. Majan, you obviously our global, omnipresent thought leader, but also on the policy side, a man who's made things happen. And I think that's the extraordinary thing about this particular panel. Really pleased to get your inputs. I'm hoping everybody benefits as much as from this conversation as much as I've enjoyed it. And with that, I'd like to thank everyone. Let's hope that throughout the balance of COP, there are great solutions and everybody has that same positive, solution-oriented dialogue that we've had today. Again, thank you very much, everyone. Have a good COP. Bye now.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you, Michael.
Bye-bye.
Appreciate it. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.